Welcome to another episode of the Sports Sentiment. I am your host, Nick Urias, and we are back once again talking college basketball. March Madness in full effect as we head into the second weekend of tournament play. We are down from what was the field of 68 now to 16 teams as the Sweet 16 is on the horizon and we are ready to get things going. First and foremost, before we just talk just March Madness and everything that's occurred within the past week. Appreciate everybody for tuning into our Mountain West tournament coverage. Always a good time out there in Las Vegas. San Jose State doing some work out there. Got to broadcast 2 games out there after San Jose State had an upset win versus Boise State. Fell apart versus New Mexico. Always a tough matchup, especially after playing a game, but the upset win versus Boise State, just a monumental victory, for SJSU in that spot, only winning 8 games and then somehow finding a way to win as a 15-point underdog. So kudos to SJSU for winning that game. That was an electric game just to kind of be on the airwaves for. And, if you don't follow me on Twitter, Nicky Rice _ posted some highlights on there. Just how the game sounded on the airwaves. And, it was probably one of the more cooler games I've been on the air. Just how everything transpired, how SJSU kind of controlled the game against a team that's always been a bad matchup for them in Boise State over the years. So just to kind of see that unfold, especially with Boise State going from the Mountain West to the Pac-12, that was a shocking result for kind of everybody in the building. And it's kind of crazy to see San Jose State basketball just kind of take over Twitter for one night. I mean, that was the kind of, I don't know if it was trending, but in the late night hours, it was definitely gaining some traction out there just amongst the college basketball world. Like, whoa, nobody saw this one coming. But that's what makes the sport great at this time of year. You just can't count anybody out, no matter how good or bad the season has gone. And, as we pivot to March Madness here, this is, kind of the way things go, right? We got to play the games on the court. Now, I think there was a lot of speculation heading into this tournament saying, hey, what's going to happen with the mid-majors? Are they going to pop up and spark, and are they going to show up for a game? And, are we going to get the chalky tournament that we got a year ago in 2026? I personally thought, I would say probably a little bit, not as chalky as it was last year. And, we get one upset for those who are not aware and haven't been keeping up with this tournament. The High Point Panthers, I would say there was some other teams, but High Point was the big upset. High Point was the big upset versus Wisconsin. I personally did not have them on my bracket to pull off the upset. I liked what Wisconsin was bringing to the table, but kind of trying to go back to, square one here. The top 4 seeds in the March Madness NCAA tournament all won their first round game. And that's something that we haven't seen in years past. I don't got the numbers in front of me, but it seems like more often than not, we've always had, a double-digit seed, like a gigantic, double-digit underdog kind of come in clutch and pop up and win a game outright. We've seen that with St. Peter's as a 15, Princeton as a 15, North Texas a few years back as a 13 or 14, right? We've kind of seen it where, you're at some point in your bracket, you're going to have to pick, just one of these dark horses and you're going to have to ride it. And last year, and especially with all the NIL and the transfer portal, just all the moving parts and how the mid-majors now get rated, when they have one good year and you miss the conference tournament and all your players get rated. We're seeing that right now in the transfer portal, even though it's yet to open up. These teams that have 20 win seasons in these, smaller tier conferences, and they have themselves a really good year. The coaching staff does a fantastic job recruiting. The chemistry is there. And, they end up, having themselves an awesome season. You make a run in the conference tournament. You don't end up winning the conference tourney. all of the heavyweights, all of the power fours just come in and, swoop in and, rate all your talent. And ultimately, what's that translated into this NCAA tournament is that a lot of these kids that would typically be at mid-major schools for, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 years are after a freshman year or sophomore year or whenever they blossom into the player that, the coaching staff wanted them to be, and showcase their talents, they're immediately hopping into the portal and, going to the next school. And, I always say, like, within this transfer portal stuff at this time of year, the grass ain't always greener on the other side. And we've seen so many of these now. We've seen so many examples of where a player is in a really good spot in his current situation, hops in the portal, takes a step up, is either redshirting the following year because the roster isn't what they envisioned it when they were in the portal and on that recruiting trip, or they're playing and they're doing all of that stuff, and what they expected as to be like a starting role, or a lot of these kids now, in these mid majors, they're going in and they were a starter putting up 15 to 18 points per game at their previous spot. And then is what ultimately happens is you're on the bench. And sure, you're contributing to winning, sometimes not always, but your drop off, your usage rate is significantly decreased. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Obviously, the trade-off is all the NIL dough, but that's what also comes in, when you hopping in the portal. And when you hop in the portal, there is always a risk, and your name is out there, and you're going to go on all these recruiting trips, and the coach might tell you one thing, and then 2-3 months later, it ultimately might not translate to what you envisioned it during the off season, right? So there's so many different layers and things to unpack, and there's so much stuff that nobody knows behind the scenes except the player themselves and the roster around them that really understands, right? And this time of year in the transfer portal, nobody knows nothing when it comes to this stuff. I mean, the player thinks they know stuff, and then it doesn't ultimately translate to what they thought. So it's hairy. The system is very, I don't want to, some way say broken. I think we're just in a really rough spot right now with the portal and the NIL right now. Does there have to be guardrails? I think ultimately years down the road, I think there will be. You talk to coaches, I've talked to Mountain West coaches about this, just how crazy the system is. And I want to get into a talking point just with High Point in here in a minute. But it's just a wacky time right now. And I'd hate to be a mid-major coach at this level, just because you could do all of this hard work. You can go find a diamond in the rough, and he's just going to hit the portal a year later if he absolutely blossoms, into something special. And a lot of these mid-major coaches now, they've, at least a lot of them that I've talked to, especially in the Mountain West, in the middle ground and bottom tier teams, they're just accepting like, hey, you know what? We got to hope we go 5 for 5 with these guys, and it translates into a fantastic season for us, because we already know we're going to only have these guys for a year. And it's very interesting to see how everybody's approach is different, right? Who goes the junior college route? Who goes the NAIA route, Division 2, right? We've seen coaches and players, go heavy in that area. And others decide, I'm going to take in a couple freshmen. You see a lot of the overseas stuff now and how they attack it in that area. Look at Fresno State this year. Look at UT Martin in the Ohio Valley this year. Every team has their own method to their madness. Remember, San Jose State 2 years ago brought in a lot of seniors, right? They brought in Donovan Yap, Josh Aduje, and they brought in guys that have registered a lot of minutes with different programs, right? And you see, this year, they bring in Kobe Garland, who was going to run their show, came from a smaller school at Longwood in the Big South, and, turned into what he is there. Right. So there is different ways to attack it. I think, every coach and their staff is kind of, tooling with that right now. And everybody understands right now, like the San Jose States, like the Missouri Valleys. I even go to like, those guys in like the Patriot, just all over all the mid-majors, all the mid-major teams. If you got a guy that's putting up numbers and he's affecting winning on your team, and there's going to be a market for him, they're going to hop in the portal. And it's always dangerous. You're playing with fire with everything in this world. But the transfer portal, the door swings both ways. I've heard Tim Miles say, you're going to lose players, you're going to gain players within it. But it's a crazy world out there right now, just with the portal. And, I hate it for fans. Just being the media head that I am, I love talking to people and, having that one-on-one. But, from a fan standpoint, people that go to these games, you would love a guy for 4 years, and especially a guy that's got such a great personality and that is marketable, and you could see kind of painting their legacy. That just doesn't happen anymore within today's game. And I hate it for the fans because, you're going to have a player for 6 months. And especially if you're in a mid-major conference or, a mid-major team, the writing is kind of already on the wall, even though, a lot of these guys, you can speculate all you want. Is he going to stay? Is he going to go with all of that stuff? But, I just think of that now, that there's just so much negative perception now with the portal. As with you're in mid-major, you're almost just assuming now that he's just going to hop in the portal and dip. And I hate that. I absolutely hate that for the fans. For all the season ticket holders that go to games and, just want to have that connection within a player. You see a lot of the Power 4 teams, right? They'll sell the kid's jersey, in some spots. And, some of that goes into the NIL and it benefits the basketball program. And, it's just repumping back into the pipeline. A lot of schools don't offer that. Every university is different in that regard. There's things behind the scenes with that type of stuff, but it's like, hey, we're only going to have the kid for a year. So, it's just, it's a crazy world right now that we're having with the portal. You're seeing the portal doesn't even open up until the first or second week of April, and kids are already, announcing it and stuff like that. Let's just put it like this. The portal doesn't technically open until the first or second week of April, whatever the date is. I think it's like April 4th or April 7th, a few days after the national championship. But let's just be honest. The transfer portal for some of these people have been open since January. And there's a bunch of, shady stuff and, things going on around the table, under the table, that it's a little bit crazy. So, just the portal, it's a mess. And, you feel for the coaches and you feel for the programs that are just stuck right in the middle, that are getting rated by all the upper, echelon teams that have, I guess, the spending money to go out there and take all your talent. It stinks. And, I hate it for the fans just as much as the coaches that are, having to do all this work behind the scenes just to recruit these guys. So that's that. I want to dive into, March Madness. We got our Sweet 16 field. I want to talk about the matchups. I want to talk about the teams involved in the Sweet 16 and kind of how they got there, just kind of my thoughts on the first and second round. I wanted to do just a selection Sunday, just kind of live, instant thoughts. But man, I was just still stuck in the recovery mode from Vegas. Being out there in Vegas for 5 days, man, I have to say, like, just between, the AC pumping and, being in that environment and little to no sleep and eating a bunch of junk. Like when you get back into your normal lifestyle, it'll catch up to you. I mean, I wasn't really myself. I'm gonna be completely honest. I wasn't really myself until back into full form. Like, okay, let's go. Let's attack this thing until maybe like 5 days. It's crazy. It's crazy. Because you say, oh, like in Vegas, anytime you go to Vegas, you're always, you know what? I'm gonna, let's go. Let's do this. But you're on. Let's just be honest. You're on business mode, but you're on vacation mode too. You want to enjoy yourself as well, and you know, so your sleeping schedule is gonna be all whacked out, and then when you come back and it's back to reality. All of a sudden, it's like, man, I need 4 or 5 days to just kind of recoup and get myself back into the mode here. But here's the deal: it's a quick turnaround from Selection Sunday to a few days later. You got the first four, and then the opening round of the NCAA tournament. You got to get right back to it. And I have to say, March Madness was, I thought the games were solid. I've seen more chaotic. I've seen more chaos in years past. And I have to say, let's start out with the High Point Panthers, because they had the upset win over Wisconsin. It was your classic 5-12 game. I've always been suckered in these 5-12 games in my bracket to just kind of pick 2 of the 12 seeds. But I'm gonna be completely honest. I went for the first time, maybe since I've been like doing this bracket stuff. I went all 5 seeds. I was like, you know what? The heck with this. Sure, can I buy into Northern Iowa? I guess. Like, I like that team, but I hate the draw for St. John's. And High Point was the one team that ended up coming along for the ride here to really upset and give us a nice little some nice juice to start day one of this tournament, because that was an early game. High Point came out firing, really going, toe to toe with the Wisconsin Badgers team, which has been awesome in the underdog role in the Big Ten. And High Point came out and they came out firing. They met their opponent. I mean, they were, like I said, going back and forth, took that late lead, with Johnston having that layup, his first 2 of the year, which is kind of hard to believe. But that High Point team, we didn't really talk about them, with Rocco Miller or anything, just because they've kind of already been on the upper trajectory. Like they've been on an upward trajectory now, that program, for years. Let's put it like this. They're a private school. They're in that, they're in the East Coast, whatever like North Carolina area. They spend a lot of money for a mid-major. Like they outspend everybody in the Big South Conference. And you go look at that roster. Go look at where those kids came from. Like Owen Aquino came from Liberty, and he's been at that Liberty. He's been at, Liberty forever. And Liberty's got filthy money. Like they outspend everybody in the Conference USA. So like they got like Owen Aquino. They got like that Fletcher kid, Rob Martin, who came from, Southeast Missouri. There's so many guys where you're like that Housen kid. He was a power 4 guy. So like High Point, like let's not get this confused with it. Like let me throw this out there. Out of everybody in the Big South, they're by far the number 1 team that spends. And out of like just mid-majors generally, they go out and fork out, for their rosters every year. So is the Big South great? No. They went 30-4, like their non-conference. Nobody wanted to play them in the non-conference. Everybody, if you followed the tournament, you heard Flynn Clayman, their head coach, say nobody wanted to play us just because, our conference is not great as a whole, right? Like the Gardner Webbs, the Charleston Southerns, all those teams drags our metrics down. Nobody's going to want to play us. Like they beat UAB, who's always a proud program in the American. Like High Point, and they're really well coached too. Like Flynn Clayman was there. He was behind Alan Huss, and Alan Huss left because he went to Creighton, and now he's going to be their head coach next year because Greg McDermott's retiring. So there is just High Point knows what they're doing. They're pumping in a lot of money into that basketball program. So I would say I just have to say, like, High Point is not sure they're a mid-major, sure, like they're a Cinderella, like, like that smaller, I guess, conference team that you're just kind of rooting for, and they got all these guys like you never heard of because they're never on TV and they're always on ESPN Plus every night, all their games. But I just didn't get the same feel that they were like a St. Peter's, a Princeton, that North Texas team that we talked about, from a few years ago. You know what? I'm forgetting a couple, like the Florida Gulf Coast, the Dunk City team, right? It just didn't have that same feel because I've heard these names before. Like they got dudes. Like look at last year's roster. They had like running the show. They had I'm blanking on his first name, but his last name Jiffa, who was at Ole Miss. They had Kimani Hamilton. We all know Kimani Hamilton in the Mountain West now, who was the UNLV big man. He was at High Point last year. Like they had some dudes on their team, that have transferred, have came from, other, quality mid majors or, Power Fours, like we talked about, and they go in there. So, and I'm not like downplaying like any of it, like that team was electrifying. They were fun to watch. Like that Rob Martin kid was schooling with Arkansas, right? And, he was beating him off the dribble and bursting with speed and hitting some nasty threes, right? So, they got talent. I'm not denying that. I'm not downplaying any like their team. I'm just saying I didn't get that feel like that they were like this team, like this mid major that had like that Cinderella feel, especially since they made the tournament last year. Yeah, different team, new coach and whatnot. But it's not like one of these teams that like where you hear their story and it's like, oh, they haven't made the NCAA tournament in 20, 30 years. And here they are, they're playing feisty and, oh, look at the 6-man off the bench. Like I think back to Doug Eddert with St. Peter's and, he's averaging like 4 points a game and then he's hitting like 25 and like an upset win versus Kentucky. Right. So, that's kind of my thoughts on that. I loved watching High Point. Once when they upset Wisconsin, I was kind of rooting for them, to beat Arkansas. But you know what? They had themselves an awesome fight in that one, in that game versus Arkansas. Man, was that a shootout. Not a lot of defense there, I think, and we'll talk about Arkansas here in a bit when we do our Sweet 16 rundown. But that was just a fun team to watch. For that 2-game stretch, just because they had a bunch of talent on that roster and they were deep too. Like they were able to go at you, like, especially when you got like a sniper like that Johnston kid, and he barely has it in his hands and he's like over 40% from 3. You think anytime it's going up, it's going in. And, that's always scary. And, I think, you heard Flynn claim and say it like, man, nobody wants to play us. And that goes back to like, just Miami, Ohio. I thought the selection committee did a pretty solid job. Like last year was a mess, obviously, right? When they had, the North Carolina chairman, right? And, he put North Carolina in despite them having 0 quad 1 wins. And it made absolutely 0 sense. And you kind of just question the credibility of the selection committee. But they had the Sun Belt commissioner on, running the show with the, on Selection Sunday. And I have to say, they did a pretty good job. Like, and I have to say, like, the bubble, like, was very weak. All those teams did themselves no favors, right? Like the Cals, the Stanfords, the SMUs, even though SMU got in. But, like, all the teams on the bubble was very weak. So it's not like there was, like, a crazy back and forth deliberation period with all of these bubble teams like we've had maybe years ago. And especially the way the Mountain West teams kind of showed up as well. The metrics weren't really there for them either, with San Diego State and New Mexico, right? It's like, okay, I understand how you got the last 4 in. I understand how you got there. Now, with that Miami, Ohio team, I thought it was a little bit criminal that they had to go to Dayton and play in the first 4. But, ended up helping them out, right? When you're in Dayton and you knew it was going to be a home game and it's 40-minute drive from your campus and you see like their student section kind of go out there and they flexed their muscles against an SMU team that was been on the downward spiral, heading into March. I think that was just an absolute gigantic W for just not only Miami, Ohio, and that basketball program and the story and just the journey to get into that tournament to win a game. And, obviously that benefits the Mid-American Conference, of course, but just an absolute W for all mid-majors. The fact that, hey, you can win like this. You can bring all your guys back if your guys have that buy-in and want to run it back and have that roster continuity. And you believe in your head coach and Travis Steele. And you want to go out there and do something special and have yourself just an absolute magical and memorable year. Now, things have to go your way, right? You have to have the dogs to do it. You got to have the horses to run. And they had everything, and they had a big time injury. The Red Hawks did at the start of the year, and they recovered really well with Luke Skaljak running the show. But I just thought that Miami, Ohio performance, the fact that nobody wanted to play them, at least that's what, everybody was saying around, just the circles and whatnot, that, hey, Miami, Ohio, nobody wants to schedule us. So that's why you see us playing Air Force and all of these other teams. And you see our strength of schedule, so ridiculously, low, on the spectrum compared to everybody else, because everybody knew we were good last year and everybody saw what we had coming back and nobody wanted to play us. So they had to play the non-conference schedule that they had and, run their gauntlet practically in the MAC. And what did that ultimately show for? With all that momentum, despite losing to UMass in the first round of the conference tournament, a win against a Power 4 team in SMU representing the ACC. And not only did they steal the game, they controlled it. Sure, SMU had their little, second half comeback, whatnot, but Miami, Ohio deserved to win that game. They controlled the game. And, that was just, I thought, a big W for mid-majors. And I thought really kind of shut everybody up for whatever the 24, 48 hour span that we did have between them and their first round game. With all that being said, I hated their first round matchup versus Tennessee. Tennessee, much more bigger team. I thought that, what was his name? Aaron Woolfolk. But Woolfolk, the big man, I thought that was just going to be a brutal matchup for him. Just from a rebounding standpoint, Tennessee's one of the best offensive rebounding teams in America. I hated that. But I love the fact that Miami, Ohio did get their spotlight on a national stage. Now they got national TV games, of course, but to have it in the NCAA tournament, technically in the first four, that was awesome. Not only for that program, but just for all mid-majors involved. Meaning hey, you can do it. If you got the guys that want to buy into the program and the coach and all of that good stuff. But kudos to Miami, Ohio, and High Point for winning the game there. How to get that crammed in there. As far as just my takeaways from the first weekend, just kind of big picture. I always say, teams, make your free throws. This is the time of year I'm always saying, make your free throws. Everybody I watch games with, make your free throws. And it's crazy to me. It's absolutely crazy to me. Because we always get, and we're going to get more of these games where the difference between the winner and the loser is this team missed 8 free throws and it's going to come back to bite them. And that's exactly what happened. The prime example was UCF, the UCF Knights, who they draw in the first round, UCLA, and they missed at least 8 free throws and they lost the game by 5. So it's moments like that. And I hate to say it, you're going to get it. You're going to get it in the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8 this weekend, where one of these teams are going to come out and it's going to be just one of these outlier free throw shooting performances. And it's not going to end well for the team that ends up missing those shots. So that's something I'm always preaching at this time of year. I'm big on coaching. Absolutely. Especially if you have tournament experience, especially if you have guys that have been around in this tournament, that will always help. I'm big on that. And for the most part, we got like the Sweet 16 field that we have with Duke, St. John's, Michigan State, UConn, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, Houston, Arizona, Arkansas, Texas, Purdue, Michigan, Alabama, Tennessee, and Iowa State. All, for the most part, outside of Nebraska, they got guys that have been here before. And yeah, I would say Nebraska is the one team. Outside of that, all those other 15 teams that we rattled off have coaches and players that have been in this spot before. And I think that really matters at this point in the season. Guys that have been, with programs before, got guys that they can trust. Guard play is another bullet point for me. Like, sure, like the more we get deeper into this thing, like you're going to see, like once when we get to the Final Four, I think you're going to see everybody's front court just be monstrous. And that's why I didn't pick 4-1 seeds in my Final Four, but I did have 3. And in fact, I have my bracket attached here, youtube.com/@thesportsentiment. Let's just go ahead and pop this thing up, which I thought for my bracket, I did a pretty solid job. Now, there's no such thing as a perfect bracket in this world because, there's just so many, crazy results and, it's just impossible to have a perfect bracket. But I have to say, when I looked at the bracket this year, I said, you know what? I'm one of these guys that want to root for the underdog. And just based on what we've had with the NIL and transfer portal turnover in this era, I've gone further and further away from that. And I only picked one upset, one real upset in the first round. And that was Troy over Nebraska, which that was something I instantly regretted the second I saw that crowd in Oklahoma City with all those Cornhusker fans. I mean, that was a Lincoln home game. So that was really worrisome. And I like Troy. I thought Troy can go and pump up shots. A team that's been there before. They won the Sun Belt last year. They had a lot of returning production, a lot of seniors. They had their coach was there last year, which I thought the second year was going to be maybe the season where they got over the hump, because I think they drew Kentucky last year and it just really didn't work. Kentucky was a different animal last year. They made the Elite 8 run that they did. So, Troy was kind of the one team. As you saw, I had Wisconsin in the first round. You're seeing on my bracket here if you're tuning in on YouTube. But, I had, some teams, where I was like, okay, I'm going to take the better coach in this spot. Like the St. John's team, right? I trust Rick Pitino, especially the way it ended last year with them in the second round. And Arkansas, really came in there and, controlled the game. And the weakness was 3-point shooting on that St. John's team last year. And they were a much higher seed this time around, which, by the way, what the heck was that? That was, before we jump into more of St. John's, the only thing that I disagreed with the selection committee, and this happens every year, is the seeding, right? There's always like a couple teams that are, overseeded or underseeded. But to me, the two that stood out, St. John's shouldn't have been a 5, and Utah State shouldn't have been a 9 seed, 8 seed? Yeah. The fact that Utah State was on the 8-9 line was insanity. And I thought they had the resume to do it. Like, I did not think their resume, when you look at it, is not an 8 seed or a 9 seed. It's just not, right? And, sure, the Mountain West being down certainly drags that. I think if you played in last year's Mountain West and you put Utah State's exact same resume, it probably gets them maybe the 6 seed that Jared Calhoun wanted when he was speaking on the podium when he was cutting down the nets at the Mountain West tournament. But the league wasn't strong this year. But still, regardless of all of that, there was no way that they should have been on the 8-9 line and drew Arizona in the second round. And then St. John's, I mean, come on. that team wasn't as good as it was last year. The Big East wasn't as good as it was last year, sure, but still, it's Rick Pitino, it's St. John's. We already know the NCAA is going to have, their way. Like, they're going to just find a way to drag down Rick Pitino just because of his past. But still, like, I thought that was a little bit ridiculous. But now they got St. John's. They pummeled Northern Iowa. A slow team that likes to drag it into the mud. And then they had a really fun game with Kansas. Everyone was complaining about that first half, but man, it really picked up in the second. And Dylan Darling, the Idaho State transfer, comes up with the big time bucket to lay it up and in. At the horn, our first buzzer beater of the tournament came on Sunday of the round two of the round of second round of this tournament. So St. John's, man, like they look solid out there. They can guard. They're gonna play with tons of physicality. Zuby Ejiofor's an animal, and they're going out there to play. So St. John's, I've liked the way that they've played thus far, and to beat Kansas too. Like Kansas, I know they were an erratic team, right? With Darren Peterson, is he playing? Is he not? But man, that team still got talent. Like, are you kidding me? Flory Badunga, like that guy's good. Like Melvin Council, that guy's one of the most beloved Jayhawks that's been there for 1 year, maybe ever, right? So like they had some dudes. They had Trey White from Illinois, and he was kind of like their filler piece, their glue guy, like where you just knew he was going to always be consistent. And St. John's, like they were ahead. Kansas came storming back, and then they ultimately put on the knockout punch at the horn. Now St. John's gets Duke. That should be a fun one. Michigan State, just to kind of run down on what these teams have done. Michigan State cruise control win versus North Dakota State. And then I thought Jeremy Fears and Cohen Carr really out-physicaled and out-rebounded a Louisville Cardinal team, where if you watched Louisville, it was just an all-finesse team. Any team that had any sort of physicality and could beat you on the glass, Louisville was toast for the most part this season in the ACC in that regard. And that's something that really stood out to me. I saw Michigan State. I saw the way that they could slow down the game. I like the way that they rebound with that front court. And if you're going to give me Tom Izzo in a spot like that, versus Pat Kelsey, and I like Pat Kelsey, he's very, you can just tell, like he's very in on the program. That's a guy, where, if you're a guard, you want to go play for him. But man, like I said, coaching matters, and you're just not going to fade Izzo in a spot like that in the second round. So I thought that was big, and you saw it kind of come into play for Louisville there. And I don't care if Michael Brown was in or out of that game. Michigan State was going to win, I feel like, unless Michael Brown banked like 8 threes in that game, which is, of course, I wouldn't have expected. Duke, look, they got all they can handle for Siena. And that was another team. Siena shouldn't have been a 16 seed. Are you kidding me? They won like 21 games this year. And, sure, the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference is not great, but like Jerry McNamara is a good coach. That 16 seed, they knocked out the 1 seed Mary Mac in their conference tournament. Man, that should have been a 15 seed at the very least, I thought. And, that's my thoughts on that. Siena, I mean, they played good for about 35 minutes until the wheels fell off. And then, TCU, I thought TCU was going to hang in there versus Duke. And, they got a terrible whistle. They got some stupid flagrant fouls that completely went their way. Duke, I mean, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt in a lot of these games. But you see, when Duke puts it together, they don't turn over the basketball. They're as good as anybody. Obviously with the Boozer twins and Isaiah Evans and all of their filler pieces that they have with Malik Brown, and, you throw in Patrick Gumba down low. Like there's just a lot that, Duke can throw at you. They're as efficient on defense as you'll get, and they got the shot makers to go do it and make a run here. I can't wait for Duke St. John's. We'll get into that matchup there in a minute. UConn, Wasn't pretty versus Furman in round one. That was another team, 15 seed. Are you kidding me? I didn't watch too much of Furman this year, but man, like Bob Ritchie always has his teams well coached. That was another team. That was when we were going back to our upset candidates. From when we were rattling off the St. Peters and the Princetons of the world. Furman was in that category too. And you know what? Furman was a 13 seed when they upset Virginia 2 years ago. So that Furman team shouldn't have been a 15 seed. Like, are you kidding me? With the Bowser brothers and that point guard that they had, like, come on, that was not a 15 seed. And Dan Hurley even said, like, man, that is not a 15 line. That is not a team that should be on the 15. And UConn struggled with them. That wasn't pretty versus Furman. I mean, you're going into that game in the second half thinking, man, Furman hits a couple of more of these threes and they start taking it to them. You never know what can happen. But Furman had no big man presence for Terrace Reed Jr. I mean, he had like 31 points and 27 rebounds. Are you kidding me? And then Alex Caravan had a career day taking out UCLA. UCLA without no Tyler Bilodeau. I mean, that's just brutal. I mean, you're missing your best player, right? Your best shot maker. That same goes on the other side with Texas Tech, right? When you lose a guy like JT Toppin, it's just going to significantly downgrade your chances of making a big time run. Like, you need to be at full strength in this tournament. And when you're losing your best player, I mean, the drop off is insane in that regard. Iowa, man, I can't find enough great things to say about Ben McCollum at head coach for the Iowa Hawkeyes. So they played their snail pace versus the Clemson Tigers. And, that was like a coin flip game, but it's like, man, Ben McCollum and Iowa, and you could go back to his last year at Drake when he won the NCAA tournament game. You just knew that they were going to dictate the pace versus Clemson. Or at least I thought that. And that's why I had Iowa in my bracket. But man, this one really, really impressed me when you go out and knock out the defending champs in the Florida Gators, right? Like, the fact that, like, you go out there, really kind of take it to them. You don't really, muck the game up, and drag it into the mud that you have, since you've had this pretty much core, with Bennett Sturts and Cale Combs and Isaiah Howard and, Cam Manyow, right? Like, that's kind of the way that they've been playing. That's how they played at Drake last year, one of the slowest teams in America. They've gone the same route this year in the Big Ten with Iowa. And the fact that they came out there and just started hitting shots, and they were actually doing a really good job of hanging down low with Alex Condon and Thomas Houck and Chenyulu, that was really impressive. And that all goes back to coaching, executing the game plan, to a T. And, man, like, then Alvaro Forgueras hits the big time corner three, which wasn't even really planned. That play was drawn up for Bennett Sturts just to go straight to the rack and tie the game up. But Sturts trusts his guys. He's the ultimate leader. He's his stock has just significantly and exponentially grown from an NBA draft standpoint. Like, this guy's gonna be a lottery pick now. And why would you not want to draft him? Former Division II guy, has the stamina to go play over 40 minutes in these games and, really run the show really well and, dictate the pace, man. And to trust your teammates too. Like, that's the leader that you want at the next level. But man, Iowa and Ben McCollum just continue to impress. And now they're going to have the Nebraska team in the Sweet 16, which is a conference game. Can't wait for that one. Houston, they do what they always do in the first weekend, just kind of take care of business. They defended the three extremely well versus the Idaho Vandals, which that Vandals team had themselves a really good run in the Big Sky tournament, right? They were in the play-in game and played 4 games in 4 days or 4 and 5 days to ultimately win the Big Sky. Always a crazy tournament, just like we said with Rocco Miller a couple weeks ago on our conference tournament preview. But Houston just kind of really able to choke them out in that regard. Like, hey, you love to shoot threes? Guess what? we got the dogs to defend the 3. And that's exactly what happened. Houston won by north of 25. And then they kind of take it to Texas A&M, which is a matchup that always scares me because we've seen this now, I feel like we've gotten that matchup in the second round 3 years in a row with Houston and Texas A&M. The difference is that they didn't have Wade Taylor this time around where he could just, kind of finagle his way, baking in all these threes and really trying to steal a game late, play the foul game. Because Houston was flirting with disaster a few years ago in that type of game. But man, I watched the first couple minutes of this game, and there was a possession where they grabbed 4 offensive rebounds, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, Texas A&M doesn't have the horses up front to hang with these guys." And I saw that possession, I was like, "Yeah, this is gonna be, Houston's gonna drill them. This is gonna be a one-sided affair," and that's exactly what happened. Houston's in the Sweet 16. Arizona, they drilled Long Island. And then really had an answer for everything versus Utah State, which credit to Utah State, man. We covered this team all year in the Mountain West, watched a ton of their games, saw them in person at the Mountain West tournament, make that dominant run. And, you question based on the Arizona performance and, the terrific second half that they had, if they were seeded properly, where would they be right now? Right. And of course, when you go speculate that means somebody else is going to get moved and all that other stuff. Shoulda, woulda, coulda, never happened. But credit Utah State. To me, that second half, the fact that, they rallied despite being down double digits and they kind of just got punched in the mouth early in that game. That's good coaching. And that's why Jared Calhoun's not there anymore. And that's why Utah State is running a national search for another coach again, because this is starting to become, just a constant now, where Utah State, you're only going to have the coach for, you're lucky to have Calhoun for 2 years. He could have left last year, but he was waiting for Cincinnati to open up. And, it's going to become a thing now with Utah State where you're going to keep making the right hires. And, if the coach has, Power 4 upside, like we've seen with Sprinkle and now Calhoun, they're going to go, especially in this day and age of college basketball, right? They're going to go. But, sucks for them, but hell of a year for the Aggies. That second half effort that they had, right? When Drake Allen's hitting all these shots and, Falslev and, is running the show and Adlin Elamine starting to come along. MJ Collins is hitting a few timely threes, right? That was just an awesome team to watch this year. They had the depth to go along with it. And, the fact that they were able to go and really give Arizona a real run for their money in that second half. If Mo Krivas is not on the court for Arizona, not grabbing all these offensive rebounds, what ultimately happens in that game? Because Krivas, they had no answer for him, which, let's just be honest, there's maybe 4 teams in this tournament that have an answer for Mo Krivas as far as on the boards is concerned. Now, he missed a lot of bunnies at the rim, but just to create extra opportunities, off missed free throws, offensive rebounds, right? To kick it out to a guy like Jaden Bradley and for him to reset everything and run the show. Bradley, I know there was a lot of flack on why he won Big 12 Player of the Year. It's a game like that in the second half when he's got to close it out against a red-hot Utah State team. That's why he won Player of the Year. This thing is not all about stats, right? And, and especially in the Mountain West. Mason Falslev won Mountain West Player of the Year, but he does so many things beyond just the scoring that makes that team go and what their success was all about, right? Because you could have gave it to JT Toppin in the Big 12, right? If you wanted a Big 12 Player of the Year. And there's so many candidates, but I understand why they gave it to Bradley, because he's the closer for that team. He's the leader for that team. For a team that's got, some freshmen and Koa Pete and Braden Burries who are really, really good. They got Mo Krivas that's been in the pipeline. They got Anthony Del Orso, who was at Campbell during his freshman year, came off the bench and didn't really play too many minutes last year. Now it's kind of like the sixth man, I would say, for that team. And Bradley is just kind of the guy that gets everybody organized and hits some crazy shots, makes the right basketball play. That stuff matters. And, that's why Arizona, I ultimately have them in the Final Four here on my bracket because of stuff like that. So, kudos to Arizona, kudos to Utah State. That was a really fun basketball game, and that shot Burries hit with the shot clock expiring, ridiculous. Arkansas, so they dominated Hawaii with the no switch defense and that 3-point shooting team, the team that's so reliant on the 3-point shot. They got all they can handle versus High Point. We kind of already talked about. I'm very worried about Arkansas and their front and what they're going to have from an inside presence versus Arizona. Like what I saw Rob Martin do with them, and don't get me wrong, that guy's quick. He's flashing. Like they're probably not going to have any guy. Probably not going to have to deal with anybody as fast as that off the dribble down the stretch in this tournament. I really don't think so. Rob Martin is just a different gear. So for High Point, that has really caught everybody off guard on that Arkansas team. But I'm really worried about Arkansas's front court presence in a matchup versus Arizona in San Jose this week. Texas is the one double-digit seed that made the Sweet 16, but you can't consider an SEC team a Cinderella. This was just a team that was just all over the place in conference, had some good wins, had some lousy losses. Didn't really do too much in non-conference because, they were smashing Prairie View A&M by 40 every night, right? But this is a team where you play in the first four, you get some momentum, you take advantage of an NC State team that has been, quite frankly, a disappointment all year, a BYU team that was beat up with no Richie Saunders and Dawson Baker, Gonzaga with no Braden Huff, which that still, you beat Gonzaga with Mark Few and all the depth that they have, even though it's not the deepest Gonzaga team, when you got to go deal with Graham Ike, like, I'm sorry, I'm going to give you your respect. I'm going to give you your flowers for beating a Gonzaga team. I don't care what version of Gonzaga you're getting. And you see momentum is real. And Sean Miller, like this guy's been around. This guy's like he coached at Xavier. He's been at plenty of other spots, right? Like this is a guy that just gets it done this time of year. And, you're going to rely on coaches like that. So kudos to him. Year one out there in Austin for what he's got. Like he's got some talent too, right? With that, like with the Dalen Swain kid and Tremont Mark, that's like 6 years now. That the Vokatitis kid is a handful down low. The European guy. They got some other guys like that Kendall Weaver guy. My goodness, like that guy's just an absolute motor. Like he's a guy I want on my team at this time of year, right? Sure, he might miss a layup or two, but man, he's one of the best rebounding guards that you're gonna find right now in this tournament. And he's just a junkyard dog. He's gonna come into your grill. He's gonna pick you up full court. He's just a motor. Like he's a guy that just doesn't need a break either. Like that stuff matters. Players like him. So Texas red hot team. I'm very intrigued to see what version of them do you get. This red hot team still in San Jose when they drop Purdue. Excited to see them. Michigan, just absolute dominance the first two games versus Howard versus St. Louis, and that St. Louis game really impressed me. Like St. Louis. I couldn't believe the shots that St. Louis was hitting in the first 30 minutes of this game, and they were still playing from behind. That's how many answers Michigan has with Lindeborg, with Mara, with Johnson, with the guards. Like there's just so much weaponry and the versatility that they have, right? Like Lindeborg is such a valuable piece for this team. That's why he won Conference Player of the Year. That's why I think ultimately when Michigan's playing in the national championship and ultimately cutting down the nets, according to my bracket, it's going to be a guy like Lindeborg that can go spread out the floor while Mara could just be like this crazy shot blocker that just alters everything, right? And then, their guards I'm a little skeptical on, right? Like I'm a little bit worried as we get deeper into this tournament about a guy like Elliot Cadeau. But when you got, their other guy like Roddy Gale that could come in and hit a big shot for him, I don't get as worried anymore just because they can rely on some other guys in that area. But Michigan, pure dominance. St. Louis, heck of a run with Josh Schertz. That's a guy that can coach. Josh Schertz. I mean, what he did at Indiana State, 2 years now at St. Louis. I'm very interested to see what his team looks like next year. I know he just signed the extension too with St. Louis, but he's waiting for the right gig to open up, I feel like. Yeah. St. Louis, very impressive. Michigan, even better. Alabama, impressive Sweet 16 appearance. I have to say, outshot Hofstra and Texas Tech. Texas Tech, we already knew wasn't the same team, but to beat Texas Tech by 30, Grant McCaslin's a really, really good coach, people. I was shocked the way that Texas Tech just kind of got pummeled in that regard, but the shots weren't falling. And once when Toppin was out of the lineup, they were strictly relying on 3-point shooting. They were going to live and die by the three all the way to the national championship. And they just ran out of, they didn't have their shots in fall versus Bama. And then on the other side, all of Bama's shots hit. Like what they hit, like north of 19 threes in that game. Like, come on. This is the way Alabama's going to beat you too now. Anyone that's followed Alabama under Nate Oates, they don't take mid-range jumpers. It's either layups or threes. And they got a bunch of guys that they can go do it with. That's how they got to the Final Four. What was it, last year or 2 years ago? Just by hitting threes and relying on layups. I'm interested to see what happens with Aiden Holloway. He's got a bunch of legal trouble right now. I don't know if he's going to come back, but still, they still got tons of guard depth. I'm not really worried about it right now. I'll be worried about when they have to go face, let's see, who did they have on their side of the bracket here? Alabama. Yeah, when they gotta go, yeah. Well, actually, I'll be worried about them versus Michigan. They're going to have to go hit 19 threes again versus Michigan if they even want to have a chance in that game. So I'm worried about them there. I think that's where it ultimately runs out. Tennessee Volunteers. I had them actually losing to Virginia. I actually had Virginia making a big run in this tournament. And Tennessee, you're impressing me, Rick Barnes. Rick Barnes is one of these guys where I'm always a little skeptical at this time of year, especially when we get deeper into the tournament. I ultimately think, it's going to run out here in the Sweet 16 when they have to go draw an Iowa State team that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But the fact that he did it with this team, I thought was pretty impressive. Like, Nate Emmett is still, like, he's going to declare for the NBA draft, but I think he's still very much a raw talent at this point. Like, he's still got stuff to work on, right? Like, I want the shot to be a little bit better. Sure, inside the arc game's fantastic. But you're going to need to develop a more consistent jump shot. He's got the physicality. He's, to go down low. Great, downhill driver. Could slash into the paint. There's a lot of good to his game. I just think, like, maybe he's like a year away. I'd love for him to stay another year in college, but that's not going to happen. But hey, like, I thought Rick Barnes has had better teams over the years when he had Zakai Ziegler and when he had, even Dalton Kennett a few years ago. Like, the fact that he got a Sweet 16 with this team, I thought was very impressive. But as we get deeper into the tournament, I worry a little bit more about this team, especially when they draw an Iowa State team on the other side against a suffocating defense. Like, Iowa State is not even healthy right now. They're missing their second best player with Joshua Jefferson. It just doesn't seem to matter. They can win games just pretty much with their defense against Tennessee State and Kentucky. And I know Kentucky didn't have the ball handler this year, which is kind of silly. The fact that, they're the number one spending team in the country. And I understand they had some injuries, but still, you'd think they'd have depth in that area where they can actually have another ball handler. So Otega Owe doesn't have to run the show. But Iowa State, man, like, that's another guy, TJ Otzelberger. I'm waiting for him to make a big run. I'm hoping this is the year because this is probably going to be the last year you have Lipsey. And, Lipsey's obviously a game changer for that team. You got Momcilovic, who's the best shooter in America, percentage-wise, and from three-point land. And they just got so many other pieces that fit in, like the Heisey guy, that's a motor. Jefferson when he gets back in there. A guy that I'm very interested in just monitor his minutes and see where he goes and see how he if he's going to have any sort of impact. Dominic Nelson. He comes off the bench. This guy was the best player at Utah Valley last year, and he gave him some quality minutes versus Tennessee State, but they just haven't needed him. I think maybe the step up from the WAC in the Big 12 is pretty drastic. He wasn't really ready. I think some of it might have to be, some of the defense stuff. I don't really know, but he was the best player on a really, really good Utah Valley team last year. And he hasn't really even cracked the rotation. Now, he got some minutes here and there. He got some first half minutes versus Kentucky, and I really liked his activity both ways in that game. So that's a game named a circle here for Iowa State, especially if they don't have Joshua Jefferson again. I think Dominic Nelson could be an impact wild card piece that could really have some effect, as we get closer and closer to the road to the Final Four. Where's the Final Four this year? In Houston? Or Indianapolis. Indianapolis. That's where we're at. So as far as the Sweet 16 is concerned, before we kind of get out of here and close things out, we got 8 games total, 4 on Thursday, 4 on Friday. We got Texas, Purdue in San Jose. We also got Arkansas, Arizona in San Jose. Texas is the red hot team right now versus the Purdue team where, I think there's been so much negative perception about Purdue this time of year in this tournament because of, the losses to North Texas and Fairleigh Dickinson and, St. Peter's, right? Like the fact that they always get knocked out to that, red hot Cinderella team. Last year was the year where all those struggles helped them to make a run. Ultimately, what was it? National championship, 2 years ago? Last year they made a solid run. I'm very excited to watch this one. Like, I think, Texas, just because they're so red hot, has a puncher's chance to win this game. I think this is going to be a one-possession game that Purdue probably wins. I have Purdue in the bracket. But this is going to be a really close game. I'm very excited to see what does Texas have on the front line with Vokatitis. They're going to have something really good with that, obviously. But Vokatitis has to stay out of foul trouble in this game. Absolutely. He's been in foul trouble in every game that they played in this tournament. What does, a guy like Trey Kaufman-Wren and Oscar Clough do to him? The battle on the glass is going to be, obviously, in every Purdue game, so essential. But Texas has to hang in that regard. And Braden Smith, guard play is going to matter. I think that's ultimately the difference. Even though Swain and Mark have been really good for this team, and Weaver, we've talked about how valuable he is. I think Purdue, with the Braden Smith and the Fletcher Lawyer 3, might ultimately be the difference. But this is a really fun game, just given the fact that how hot Texas is and how contagious that can be at this time of year, when you're going up against that. So excited to see that one. Iowa, Nebraska. How can you not be excited about this one in Houston, Texas, right? Iowa, Nebraska. I mean, this is going to be a fun one. Like, sure, it's a conference game. Forget about all that. Nebraska, this thing is starting to turn into something magical. They had the 20-0, whatever it was, right? They were like 20-0 to start the year. You see the crowd, like you see how the buy-in, what they have, like all of their just guys with Jamarcus Lawrence and their guards hitting all these threes, and they got the inside presence with Rank Mast. Despite losing a Sejan, I think that's his last name, for the year, the DePaul transfer, it just hasn't really mattered. Like, they come out, they just have this special, it's just something, it's brewing into something special, right? It's like the more mainstream Miami, Ohio, if you want to call it that, just because Nebraska basketball just really doesn't have these type of, seasons like this. And the fact that they're at the Sweet 16, and I see that crowd at Oklahoma City, and how that game ended versus Vanderbilt, my goodness. Like the fact that they got the bucket and then Tyler Tanner's shot went in, but didn't. Like, that was incredible. I mean, Iowa's coming off the Florida beating. I mean, how can you can't be more impressed than that. This is what I would call the ultimate coin flip game. Good. I mean, there's no edge to picking a side here. I mean, the game's a pick 'em for a reason. According to the wise guys in Vegas, this is a good game to just sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and just watch two, really good basketball coaches and Fred Hoiberg and Ben McCollum go at it. Who dictates the pace? Nebraska likes to run. Iowa likes to slow it down. Can't wait to watch this one. Should be a fun one. if you had to force me to pick a side, I'm going to take Iowa. But again, I've been dead wrong on Nebraska this tournament. Remember, I had them losing to Troy. You were staring at the bracket for 40 minutes for our YouTube audience. So good luck. Just enjoy the game. Arkansas and Arizona. I've kind of already talked about this one. I think Arizona's front court presence is going to be too much, but I have so much respect for John Calipari. I really do. Like, he's got a dog in Darius Acuff. Billy Richmond has been really good in this tournament, giving them timely buckets. Trevin Brazil is going to be really big for this team to go hang with a guy like Mo Krivas. And I think that's where this game's going to come down to. Can Arkansas get enough down low? Can they stop the inside presence of Arizona? Because ultimately, I think Darius Acuff is going to have to drop 30, I think, in this game if Arkansas wants to win. He might have to drop more, but I think that's where this thing goes. Arkansas, when you count this team out, like, I like Coach Calipari as an underdog. Let's just put it like that. So I'm excited to see this one. This one's in San Jose. I'd expect a pretty good Arizona crowd in this game in San Jose too. Not too far of travel. They were probably already in Vegas for watching, their team in the first 2 rounds. Save your money up, go to San Jose, watch your team in the Sweet 16, the Elite 8, and then just go fly to Indianapolis if you may get that far. I think that's probably the most, I would probably say that's the most feasible itinerary right now for Arizona. And look, they were in San Diego too, as well. Like, this is a pretty, favorable trip. Like, out of all the teams that have traveled, right? Arizona, you've had a pretty good break with the travel compared to what like Texas has done, right? Going from Dayton to Portland to, thankfully now they only got to go to San Jose, but there's teams that have had worse travel than that. Illinois and Houston. Wow, that's a fantastic game. Houston, I'm going to just take them at this time of year. I'm sorry. Like, I think this is Brad Underwood's best team. I really do. I think this is Brad Underwood's best team. His team's playing really good right now. Like, they've beat Penn and they've beat, I didn't really talk about them, Illinois, but they've beat Penn and they beat VCU. And they kind of really took it to both of them, right? So they've been very dominant in this tournament. But Houston, I think it's just going to be a different animal. Defending the 3 in this game will be crucial for Houston. They do that extremely well. Rebounding will be something, just to obviously in all these games, but rebounding, like if Houston, just has all the offensive rebounds that they had versus Texas A&M, Houston's going to win this game. The guard play is going to be really good in this one, right? Like, Merkovich for Illinois, man, that guy's just such a valuable piece for them. He's really just a point forward for them. But Illinois has got the dudes to go bang and bump with Houston. I just think I trust Kelvin Sampson in a spot like this to put together a better game plan. And if the game's close, I want him off on an ATO, to really put something together. And from an X's and O's standpoint, draw up the game winner. We've seen this with Sampson. Go rewatch the Houston versus Purdue game last year. What was that? The Elite 8 game. And Milos Uzan had himself the game winner. And that was all based on Kelvin Sampson drawing something up. What is this, like Brad Underwood? Is this like the furthest? Like, has he ever gotten to an Elite 8 under Illinois? I'm going to say no, just based on the top of my head. So this is his best team. But I just think Houston will be a little bit too much. Going to Friday, St. John's and Duke. Wow, what a game. How about the games in DC? Like, there's a reason why the get-in price is over $400 because you're getting St. John's and Duke and Michigan State and UConn. I mean, you're talking about, you want to talk about some good basketball programs and some good coaches. DC, you're getting blessed. But it's coming with the price, of course. St. John's and Duke. Look, I think Duke will beat the chalky side. I had Duke in the bracket. But I'm going to trust Rick Pitino. Like, if Rick Pitino can get it done versus Duke. Obviously, like Pitino over Shire, like just from a coaching standpoint. But Shire, like he's got the talent. They're gonna Duke's offense, I think, will ultimately be the difference. I worry about St. John's, like in some stretches, like with their offense. That's why I think Duke ultimately wins. But this game, I think, will be close. I think it'll be close. I think Patino will find a way, like to get it to like a one-score game. Like he's going to keep this one tight for a large stretch. And that's where I have that one going. Alabama and Michigan, I already said Alabama's got to make 19 threes like they did versus Texas Tech. I don't think that's going to happen versus Michigan. Michigan, I think, is going to roll here. I think this will probably be one of your bigger blowouts of the Sweet 16. Michigan State and UConn, wow, fantastic game. To me, this is going to come down to just, I think Michigan State's playing better ball right now. And I trust Izzo as we get deeper and deeper into the tournament. Not that I don't trust Hurley. I mean, Hurley's just been fantastic, but I got a little worried in that first round game with UConn when I don't see Braden Mullins hitting shots or silent. Like I understand Demery didn't play versus Furman, but I like this team. I think you can only rely on Caravan so much. Like at some point, the other guys are gonna have to go do a little bit more, and I just trust Michigan State's guys to provide that. Like I like Jordan Scott coming off the bench, even though he's a freshman for Michigan State, to come and provide some stuff for them. Obviously Fears and Carr and Kohler, right? Like those are, your blue chip guys. But even like Tang off the bench can hit them some threes. Scott, like Michigan State just has more horses that I trust. And I think when you throw in the Izzo factor as well, I mean, it's a coin flip game, but I think that's what that's going to come down to. Michigan State, I think, will be able to dictate things a little bit more. Very interested to see the crowd in this one. I would imagine more UConn fans, but I don't know. Should be a really fun game. And then Tennessee and Iowa State to cap it all off before we get out of here. I like Iowa State in this game, especially if they get Joshua Jefferson back. I think this is a game where I think you see kind of Tennessee. Like this is a game where their offense is really going to stall. I think Iowa State here wins with margin. I think it'll be a tight game early and then they pull away. Like once when Iowa State starts hitting shots, like you see, and we've seen this under Otzelberger, like when their offense not only versus Kentucky, but even like in years past, like I remember 2 years ago versus Washington State, they came out slow out of the gate and they spotted Wazoo like 10, 12 points in the early going. And they still found a way to come back and win the basketball game. Right. So that's exactly what happened versus Kentucky. They still won by double digits. Like their defense will always grit and grind you for 40 minutes. But once when that offense comes to play, they're really hard to stop. And I think Iowa State, you're going to have them. So this is going to be a full 40-minute effort from them on both sides. And I don't know if Tennessee offensively will have the firepower. Because once when that defense gets going and they start forcing turnovers, Iowa State, there's just not many answers for them. I also just do think, well, I mean, you could say this for both coaches, but we're just kind of due for a TJ Otzelberger deep run at this point. We've been saying this with Rick Barnes with Tennessee now for years. But I think Iowa State just has a little bit more in the tank. And I'm gonna take Lipsy and Otzelberger and Momcilovic, and especially if they get Jefferson back to go rally and get it done versus the Volunteers. That game in Chicago, Illinois as well. So I'd expect Iowa State to travel pretty well to that one. They got a well-traveled fan base, but that will just about do it. A nice long, 73-minute episode here. We'll probably get to a little bit longer than that, but appreciate everybody. This was always a good time. We had a lot to unpack here just because we've had so many games and this is our first time really talking March Madness. So look, we'll throw some timestamps down if you watched from start to finish or listen from start to finish. I appreciate y'all and kudos to you. Go ahead, give it like, comment, subscribe. If you leave comments, I will always provide feedback. I'll always, whatever you throw at me, I'll always hit you back with something. So if you want to do that, I'm active. So appreciate everybody. For always tuning in. We'll come back. We'll be back next week. We'll revisit Sweet 16 and Elite 8. We'll dive more into Final Four and all that good stuff. So March basketball in full effect. We're starting to hit towards the back end of it. And 2-3 weeks from now, all you're going to hear is transfer portal talk. So, things are starting to wind down now. The chaos, like from what it was the first 4 days from what we had nearly a week ago, that's all come and gone. We got things that are much more spaced out now. But I think that gives us more time to talk about the matchups, reflect on them, and then preview into, obviously, when the heavyweights go at it, Indianapolis in the Final Four. So can't wait for that. We'll be talking next week, everybody. Once again, I'm your host, Nick Urias, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.